My name's Boodman. I'm an engineer on the Gears team. And this talk is about HTML5 and Gears and how they relate. So some quick context here, just to sort of set the stage. When these developer days and like similar sort of conferences, they ask you for what you're going to talk about like 4 months in advance. And they ask you typically for a title and a blurb and an excerpt of what the thing's going to be about. And I don't know if you're anything like me, that is beyond the event horizon for me. And so we were brainstorming like different things we could talk about. And one of the things I had been thinking about a lot at that time was HTML5. And the WebKit guys were doing some really cool stuff around databases. And so it was on my mind. And so I'm like, I think one of the other guys on the team mentioned this idea. And I was like, great, we'll do that. And that was all the thought I put into it for about 2 months. So yeah, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but when I started thinking about it, we got further along in the timing, I started to get worried about giving this presentation because standards are really a burden for vendors, which is basically what Gears is. It has a lot of implementing standards has a lot of negatives and not so many positives for vendors, and we were having to deal with these things quite a bit. Some of the downsides are you don't get to design your own APIs often. So one of the fun parts about working on Gears is designing APIs. And if you're working with standards committees, you frequently don't have to do that, or you have to compromise, which isn't fun. The standard specs are legalese, basically. They're like legal documents. They're incredibly complicated to parse, and they're mind-bending if you've looked at them. And that's not fun. And Alex Russell was talking about this yesterday. Standards compliance is a cost center for most vendors. You don't win users by being super standards compliant. At the very least, you don't lose users. This is just something you need to do to play in the game. You don't win the game by being standards compliant. And finally, being involved in standards is incredibly exhausting and depressing. And that was part of why I was kind of I was not looking forward to this, because I had been taking part in some of the mailing lists, and there were many very emotional discussions about how database API should work, how post-message API should work. There's been a long argument about Microsoft's proposal for cross-domain requests versus XHR2, and it gets very heated, and you just feel like this can't be the right way. There must be, maybe we should just go back to letting it be evolutionary. Let the people fight it out, and let the best thing win. And Alex was proposing this yesterday. Is our standards really worth it? Do we care? Should we just let evolution take its course? And I think that's an interesting question. And the way I think about it is, I used to be a web developer before I worked on Gears, and I actually lived through the initial browser war with Netscape 4 versus IE4. And I don't know how many people in the audience lived through that, but thank you. Yes, it was hell. And I think that the original browser war is a lot of the reason why web developers, among all other types of programmers, are so obsessive about standards. I think that this might be baked into our DNA after living through this. And even people who weren't around then sort of pick it up from the community. Some of the problems that happened during then were wildly incompatible ideas. Like, not just like what we have today, where the syntax is slightly different, but like completely different concepts. Like Netscape 4 layers and IE4 document object model were completely different. And trying to do an application that worked on top of both of those was crazy complicated. It required superhuman feats of skill and patience to make it work. And it just wasn't really practical. And that was just to make it work in 2 browsers. Other problems were there were many proprietary and or buggy features. There were abandoned features where people would stake their product or their business around some feature that a vendor came up with, and then the vendor would decide like 2 years later, that wasn't such a great idea. And they just completely abandon it. And meanwhile, I think Alex phrased it as local minima, which is a very abstract way to put it, but this is like some guy's business, who can no longer make new versions of his product because the underlying platform is not being updated. And finally, another really negative thing about this time was that Netscape basically went out of business, and the Netscape browser turned into an anchor weighing down the entire internet because it was still in circulation. And so I think web developers responded to this horrible time by basically saying to themselves, never again, we're never going to be in this situation again, and adopting this web standards mantra. And I think it gets really religious, but it comes down to two practical issues, very practical issues for web developers. Standards decrease cost and risk for web developers. If you have standards, you can write code and have it work everywhere. And yes, those are relative terms, but the fact is that today, if you write your code to standards, you can basically be assured that it will work in every major browser. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. These are people that work in different companies, often competing companies, in different places, and there's 5 major browsers that will all work relatively well if you target standards. That's pretty good. And you will also know that your code will work in future browsers, which is also very important, so you won't code yourself into a corner. So it's just about decreasing cost and risk for web developers. So circling back, so I was thinking about all this, and so what do I want to say about gears and standards? And I just kept thinking, it kept getting worse and worse because I was like, all I really want to say is, I feel your pain. I was there. We understand and we know that standards are important and we want to support them. And even so, supporting standards is not like a checkbox. It's a years process. It's an ongoing thing. It's mailing list conversations that last over years, and bug tracking and iterations on APIs. It's not. You can't ever say, okay, we support standards, we're done. So I was trying to figure out how do I express this in a presentation, and this idea popped into my head of a slide of a sort of an image. And I thought, oh, maybe this could go on a T-shirt or badges or something like that. That'd be cool. And I don't know. Maybe you guys can tell me if it's appropriate. Maybe not. So I toned it down a little bit. And it's kind of PR-y, but this is really the truth. Gears is committed to supporting open web standards. And by supporting that, I'm referring to that ongoing process. This isn't something that we can just magically say, okay, we support web standards, we're done. This is something that's going to take a long time. It's iterations, and it involves both contributing to the standards in terms of designs, as well as implementations. So I want to go into a little bit more detail about what I mean by support. And I want to do that by looking at one particular standard, HTML5. But this by no means is picking HTML5 as a favorite. It's just an example. We feel the same way about all open web standards. So HTML5 in particular holds kind of a special place in my heart because it's close to what Gears is about. I think the name HTML5 is apropos because HTML5 really is about incremental improvement to HTML. It's not about reinventing HTML. It's not about rethinking how it works. It's about what can we add, what targeted improvements can we add that will really increase the power of browsers. It's completely open. Anyone can contribute. All the communication happens completely in the open. And it's really turned into something of a movement where people all over, web developers, vendors, everyone is rediscovering wow, we really can change things, and it really can happen in timescales that matter to us. So in that context, what is Gears? Of course, if you guys have been to the other presentations, you know that Gears is a browser plugin. We're focused on improving existing web browsers. Again, it's an incremental approach. It's practical and targeted. We're not trying to reinvent things. We're just trying to add what's necessary, the bare minimum that's necessary to make new capabilities possible. New applications possible. Again, it's completely open. We have an open process, an open community. Anyone can contribute. And although we have zero authority, we do move really fast. So that gives us a certain amount of flexibility because we can interact with the standards communities we can interact with the standards much more rapidly than other vendors because we release more frequently. Another important thing I want to point out about Gears, and that relates to this conversation, is that Gears targets developers specifically. Most browser vendors, they have to target developers and users. They have two groups of customers that they're targeting. And this is a really important thing to understand because when browser vendors are making money, they're making money by users, getting users. So not by getting developers. And for Gears, we specifically target developers. So we don't have to choose when we're allocating resources and people for projects whether to focus on user features or developer features, because we only have developers. So for us, developers are a profit center. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. So how does Gears relate to HTML5? So at a high level, we're both pushing the open web forward in different ways. HTML5 and other web standards are specifying new features, new incremental features to HTML. Gears is implementing new incremental features to HTML. The Gears team, the Gears engineers and open source contributors participate in the standards process directly by, in the mailing list, proposing features, specifying new APIs, giving feedback. But Gears is also a playground for new experimental APIs. So Gears can be ahead of the HTML, of the web standards, trying out new ideas. And this has actually happened in the past. With the database API, when we launched Gears, we actually talked to various people about, like, hey, it would be cool to have this as a web standard, wouldn't it? Like, you could have databases. That'd be neat. And we, people were like, we're not really sure if that makes sense for the web platform. It seems maybe it's dangerous. We're not really sure. And so we were like, okay, cool. We'll just go ahead and experiment with it and see how it goes. And it turns out it was very useful. And it turns out other vendors wanted to do it. And so it ended up becoming a part of HTML5. And so that's an example of how Gears can be ahead of the curve, trying out new ideas that will eventually become part of web standards. On the flip side, once things become part of web standards, there are some standards that we can actually implement in Gears. So we can be both ahead and sort of behind the curve at the same time. So we can actually implement standardized HTML or standard web standards in Gears. And that's actually something I'd like to show you a little bit more about. So I have a series of very ambitious demos here. I hope that they go well. Please excuse me if it doesn't work out. But at least we have the code. So this is the HTML5 database API. And it's similar to the current Gears database API, but a little bit different in shape. It has some improvements that were added after the lessons learned with Gears database version 1. So for example, it has this transaction method that calls a function callback. And the advantage of this is that you can never have unbalanced transactions, which is really convenient for developers. So there's improvements. And up until a few months ago, this was only a spec. It was only an idea. No one had implemented this. So you couldn't use it. But the guys at WebKit have actually gone ahead and implemented this, and it's in the newest Safari. So I can actually run code that runs this HTML5 database API. Hopefully. All right, cool, it's working. So this is using the HTML5 database API in Safari. This is the latest version of Safari. It's a list of my favorite food, etc. Whatever. It's a database API, not super. Demos of database APIs not super exciting, but it's cool that now it's baked into browsers. That's the cool thing. It's actually become part of WebKit. So I was saying that we can implement HTML5 APIs in Gears. How do we do that exactly? One thing that we definitely don't want to do is we do not want to conflict with any vendor implementations, right? Like, we want Gears and to be able to run in browsers, and then if the browser ends up implementing the API, we don't want to conflict with it. So what we've decided to do on Gears to avoid this situation is to put our APIs in a separate namespace from the standard APIs. So it's the exact same API. It has the exact same methods, properties, object model, etc. But it has a separate top-level entry point. So this is an example of how you'd use that. This is very typical JavaScript, idiomatic JavaScript. We check to see if the open database method exists. If it does, that means the browser vendor implements this API, and we call it. And whoops, this shouldn't say open database. Sorry, ignore that. If it doesn't, then it will call Gears to create the same object. So basically, Gears has this object called Database Manager that sort of takes the place of the window object in the database, in the HTML5 database API. And then once you have that object, the rest of the code works exactly the same. So if you wrote code that was targeting HTML5, and then you wanted to use Gears, you just add this one little switch at the top, and the reverse is also true. So I have a demo of that. Oops, that was stupid. Okay, it's not working. Sorry. But you can imagine that we've gone ahead and implemented the HTML5 database API in Gears, and for some reason it's not working. And you would be able to use that code exactly the same way. And this is not the reason why this is a little bit buggy is because this code is currently it's not part of the official Gears build. This is something that we're working on right now, and I was trying to get together for this demo, and didn't quite happen. Yeah, I'm trying to pull it back up, but it's not. I'm not having any network luck, unfortunately. Oh, all right. Sorry. At least you got to see the heart again. I worked really hard on that. Maybe if I would have put more time into the code. All right, yeah, so here's the code again. And I don't know if you noticed, but I was attempting to run Gears with Firefox 3. And I know that's been a common request, and it's definitely something that we've heard and we really want to do, and we are working on it as fast as we can. And I had hoped to demo Gears with Firefox 3, but you'll just have to trust me that it works. Sort of. Okay, so the last thing oh, you know what? I realized what I forgot to do. I forgot to change the code. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so let's just try this, see what luck we have. All right, so we don't want that. Thank you. You guys rock. I appreciate it. Oh, awesome. It was a group effort. Now we can have bacon bits. Excellent. Thank you very much. So cool. So now we have shown that we change one line of code, and we have switched from using a native implementation to using Gears. So the next thing I wanted to show before I go on to the next slide, and hopefully this one will work out too, is so Gears actually has what I was talking about before, where Gears can actually be ahead of the standard. So we've already done this with the Database 2 API, with the HTML5 database API. Gears has extensions to the standard that for various things. For example, the original Gears database API had a full text index, which MySpace uses. And the HTML5 specification does not say to have a full text index. It's left up to the implementation. And Safari has not implemented this. So you get, if you may choose to use the Gears implementation of the HTML5 database API in order to get these extra features. So since we're already, in the case of Firefox, we're already doing that. We're already using Gears. Let me just bring up this thing that shows the full text off so we can see that we're definitely using it. So we should be able to type whatever. Okay. Anyway, I'll just go on to the next slide. The point was going to be that you may choose to use one implementation or the other based on their capabilities or even their bugs. If you want to work around one particular bug, then you might choose to use one implementation or the other. What are we doing here? Okay. So what are the advantages of implementing HTML5 APIs in Gears? Okay, the first one, the most major one, is that you can use them immediately. So as soon as Gears ships Database 2, which will have this API, then you can use the HTML5 database API on any browser that Gears supports, which brings the time to use it from years until all the browsers implement it down to months when Gears ships it. And the other cool thing about it is that, as I was saying before, you could use Gears today to get access to this API, and then when other browser vendors add it, you could just switch to using them without changing your code. As I was trying to point out, Gears can experiment with new features for existing specs, such as the synchronous transaction API that we have for doing non-asynchronous transactions in workers, or the full text search. And Gears can rapidly iterate and feed back into the standards process. So Gears can serve as sort of like a crucible for trying out new things for the standards. There are some limitations, though. Gears only can provide APIs in the form of JavaScript. So like HTML5 has a bunch of tags added to HTML, like dividers and phrase elements and stuff like this. And of course, Gears is not going to be able to implement any of these. There's also no support for APIs that are based on tags. So HTML5 has a bunch of APIs that are programmatic APIs, but they have a tag component. For example, Canvas. Has a very rich programmatic API, but you start it by using a Canvas element declaratively. And Gears can't implement the tag part. But we do have a workaround for that. And we have this idea, we haven't actually implemented this, but this is an idea for how we could work around this that we've been terming bridges. So if we wanted to implement the Canvas API, and we've actually started prototyping this, we can't do the tags, but we could provide bridge APIs into Gears and out of Gears. So instead of having a Canvas tag, you would use the Gears factory to create a Canvas object. And then since you can't see it because it's in memory, you need some way to render it. So we would provide another bridge API to get a blob. If you went to the other talk, you know what blobs are. And then to get a URL to that blob so that you can display it. And of course, you could use the URL in an image tag or whatever. And this way, you could use the entire rich Canvas API, and you only have to work around the fact that Gears can't do tags in the very edges of your API. So one question we get a lot is, what if browsers implement HTML5 too? So what if Firefox 4 implements the database API? Hooray. We started Gears because browser vendors were not moving fast enough for us, and we wanted some way to influence that. And if Gears results in browser vendors implementing tons of cool APIs, we win. Like, we collectively win. Separately from that, the question is, well, would you stop offering the database API for Firefox 4? if Gears shipped a compatible database API? And the answer is no, because we want the ability to. Well, I mean, what if we want to add a new? We want to push it even further than the spec says. So that's the reason why we've specifically chosen to these separate namespaces. So the two implementations can coexist peacefully. And developers can choose which one they want to use. And as I was saying before, they may choose for a variety of reasons. They may choose one because it's faster. They may choose one because the other one doesn't work. They may choose like one because it's buggy or not buggy or whatever. And I've heard people ask, like, well, isn't it confusing that there will be two ways to get a database object in a particular browser? And I don't think that's true at all. Web developers are used to having 0 choices, and I think having 2 choices is excellent, not bad. So that's about all I got. If you want to get involved, as I said, we're a completely open group, and so there's a number of ways you can participate. We have a group on groups.google.com where engineering is done and a lot of design is done on this, and discussion about APIs. If you want to get involved in a more browser or vendor neutral way, you can join any one of the two. There's 2 main standards groups that are doing this kind of work. The Web API group and W3C, and the WhatWG, who does HTML5. If you want to code, you could build sample apps, build test suites. There's a huge need for test suites across all vendors, so that we can know for sure that we're interoperable. And if you want to get your hands dirty and work on Gears, we welcome any help at all. We are to the point on Gears where it's easy to build your own modules, where you can jump in, start with an existing module, and modify it and build a new module. So we've had a lot of people ask about, hey, can I get USB access through Gears? And the answer is yes, theoretically. We would love to help. So we welcome anyone to get involved. If you have any interest in this, please don't hesitate to contact us on the group. We are anxious to hear from you. And I'll open up to questions.
Hi, yes. I had a question. At the beginning of your slides, you're talking about the state of the browser market about 5 years ago when it was very fragmented, and how standards have helped improve that, and where you don't have to worry about this fragmentation. But then the latter part of your slide, you're talking about adding fragmentation by having multiple ways of, say, doing a database API. And I'm just curious if you could comment on how you reconcile those two things, which seem to contradict each other. Thank you.
Okay. The question is, I said that fragmentation in the original browser was bad, but then I said that Gears is going to be offering 2 different ways to, for example, get databases. How do those reconcile? And I think as long as the APIs are compatible, there's no problem here. Even if the APIs, let's say that the APIs are a superset of each other. Let's say that Gears offers more functionality than the native one, but the subset that is the same is compatible. I don't see a problem. It's really more a matter of the desire to be interoperable than actually being interoperable in every single detail. The desire to be interoperable is the most important thing, and if we're off in the little details, we'll fix those over the releases. And there's going to be interop problems in the details, whether we want them to or not, because there will be bugs. But it's the desire to fix them that is really important. Next question.
I got a couple of quick questions for you. HTML5 local server, is that, I heard someone say that it is in there, but
yes,
it's in the WebKit implementation. What's it called?
The question is, what's the equivalent of local server in HTML5? It's called offline cache.
Is it in the WebKit builds already?
No, it's not in WebKit builds, but we see questions on the HTML5 mailing list from Apple people about the offline cache, so I assume they're working on it.
Okay. Is there any plans to reconcile the Gears APIs and the HTML5 APIs once those are formalized and vendors start to implement it?
Yeah. The question is, will we reconcile Gears local server and HTML5 offline cache? And the answer is yes. I don't have a definitive time frame. It's like a prioritization issue, but it's definitely a desire.
Sorry, real quick, last thing. The database, you said that there are modules, Gears modules that you can build. Would the modules then have access to the database also? the Gears database. So let's say I built a custom module which does, let's just say, but it wants to talk to the database and then do the synchronization with my database as backend. So I don't want to do it through the browser, but I want to kind of do it outside the browser. Would that be possible? Or
the question is, can you use the Gears database from another Gears module? And the answer is, you can use SQLite as a backing store, which we do all the time as like a persistence layer. We use that all throughout Gears just because it's convenient. And you can also theoretically like access user databases through another module, but I can't think of a use case for that right off the top of my head.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Quick question. Any plans to do crypto support or big num support in Gears, just so you can do cryptographic operations fairly quickly in JavaScript?
The first one's a JavaScript library, right? And Windows, you said?
No, I mean just the general support for math on large numbers and things like that. Things that are pretty slow in JavaScript. If there was an API to do that in Gears, it could do some pretty fun stuff.
So the question is there any plans to add support for doing complex calculations more quickly? Okay, that's a really interesting question. So we've thought about this a lot. Our current answer is there's worker pools. So although worker pools don't make the code go faster, they do avoid blocking the UI, which is a big improvement. And also they sort of have the effect of making the code go faster, because if you don't have worker pools and you want to do a lot of calculation, you have no choice but to break it up with timers. And the timers are super inefficient. And so they end up slowing down your code by factors. And so this does help a little bit. But the real question you're asking is a little bit harder. I think what we need is faster JavaScript engines, probably in the short term. And we would ideally host those engines in worker pool. So like Mozilla is working on a new JavaScript engine, I think, and we could theoretically use that.
You were mentioning that WebKit in Safari now supports some of the elements you guys introduced in Gears. Is there any plans to move Gears to work with WebKit so that you could use some of the benefits that you were mentioning?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So the part 3 of the demo from Hell was to show Gears working in Safari. So this is something that we're working on, and we've been working on. And actually, the guy who's been spearheading it is here in the audience. Jeremy, raise your hand. Maybe he's gone. Well, he was here. And it's actually really cool. It's coming along. And I can't give a definitive date, but it's getting really close.
Thank you.
You mentioned that eventually browsers will implement HTML5, but then Gears will always be like a step ahead of the standards. Then Gears will be like you're looking forward to being like adopted like Flash, for example. Like it's a widespread adoption policy, or eventually you want to move with the standards, or you always want to just keep ahead of them.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
I mean, if in another Gears talk, you all said that there were 2 ways you want to widespread Gears, like being part of the standards, or being adopted via Flash, like Flash,
right?
A widespread adopted. So if you're always kind of ahead of the standards, you have no choice but to be like accepted like Flash,
right?
And really not.
So it's unfortunate. Both are true, even though it sounds weird. The question is, we had said that there's 2 ways for Gears to get widespread adoption. One is for it to be adopted by HTML5 and for the browsers to implement that, and the other is for Gears itself to have widespread distribution. And I think what's meant by that is more the bigger goal of, we all want to be able to build applications that don't suck. And in order to achieve that, we need these APIs to exist in browsers one way or another. And there's 2 ways to achieve that. And yes, as the Gears team, we would love it if Gears was everywhere. That is our goal. But if it's not possible for Gears to go some places, and those places implement HTML5 instead, that is also a perfectly good solution. And yeah, those browsers will by definition be slightly behind. But I mean, it's not a black and white situation. Right now we have 0. If we get 0.8, that's pretty cool. 0.8 is good. I'm good with 0.8. Yes?
Hey, Aaron. Great talk.
Thanks.
I have a question about distribution, probably a follow-up to that. Google already offers a customized version of Firefox with the Google Toolbar pre-installed. Are there any plans to offer a version with Gears installed as well?
The question is, are there any plans to bundle Gears with Firefox? And the answer is, we would love to do that, but there's no plans at this time.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks a lot for coming. I really appreciate it.